Hello, my oodles and noodles. We are back from the floor of my mother's apartment yet again. I'm still not home, still taking care of the dog, and I wanted to do something a little bit different today, so bear with me. We are going to talk about Oliver Sacks's autobiography, On the Move, and it is a beautifully written book. I really, really hope all of you check it out after this. I'm someone who grew up, just reading fantasy, a little bit of science fiction. As I got older, I got into, more science and nutrition and health and really branched myself out in terms of psychology and all those things, but I never really got into autobiographies. And so this was my first foray into it. And I have to say, it was phenomenal. It was really great. For those of you who do not know who Oliver Sacks is, he is a scientist, a writer, obviously, as well, just a doctor who had one of the most fascinating lives. Just really, really incredible life. Where this is a man who he was born in Britain and moved over to the United States when he was a young man. And this book kind of follows through in his development through his life, personally and with his patients and all the other interesting facets of his life that he went through. This is the kind of guy who basically he rode his motorcycle across the United States. He used to be in powerlifting competitions. He explored all sorts of things. He was in California, Venice Beach, like really seeing all the explosion of bodybuilding and powerlifting while simultaneously, you know, living in a little building off of a campus where he was kind of illegally working as a researcher, doing all sorts of medical stuff. And he explored in so many ways. And he was also doing it, this was happening during the 50s and whatnot, 60s and 70s. And he was a man who was homosexual. He was, I guess he's passed on unfortunately, but he was homosexual, and at the time this was very much not as much of an accepted thing. So we get to see that kind of flow of him dealing with his parents, coming out to them, and kind of the non-acceptance that he got from especially his mother, but then how that developed into kind of acceptance and love later on because they still had such a strong relationship, and even his own mentality of trying to understand where his mom was coming from and why she couldn't really grasp his thing, and even his own unacceptance of it because he basically, for all intents and purposes, was alone for most of his life. This is a person who had a little fling here and there, but didn't really have a partner until he was I think he was in his late 70s when he finally met the love of his life. So it was a really beautiful thing that's explored in this. And then, of course, the main central focus of it, besides the interesting little tangents where you get to see his life, and as I said, these explorations of fitness and bodybuilding and nature and walking and all that jazz, you really, really get to see him explore all the different patience he had. And I can tell you off the bat, he's written many, many, many books on his patients, his case files. And there's another book called Musicophilia, which is super complicated, really hard to read through, but still really incredibly interesting, about people who, let's say, are suffering through Alzheimer's and other degenerative brain diseases, memory issues, who can suddenly come alive and remember things when they're playing music, and other different facets of it. It's super, super interesting. And in this book, you get to see, I think he explores a little bit of Tourette's. He explores probably one of the most interesting things. I can't recall off the top of my head the name of it, but it actually got made into a movie with Robin Williams and Robert De Niro, where it explores these post I think it's called encephalitis patients, post encephalitis. They were a very, very small subset of people during this, right after World War II, if I remember correctly, who contracted what was called the sleeping disease at the time, and nobody knew what it was. It only happened at this one period of time. It's never happened again. It was super, super strange, where people became sort of catatonic, or just had all sorts of neurological issues where they couldn't function properly. Sometimes they couldn't move, sometimes they could, but it would be like in jerks, and it was all these strange different things. And there was different aspects to them right up until they developed L-DOPA, which is obviously based off the hormone dopamine. I suggest you Google that because that's a whole nother ballgame trying to explain all the things that dopamine does. But for all intents and purposes, most of us know of the dopamine as sort of the feel good hormone in a certain sense. It's what motivates us, what pushes us, but it's also what is responsible for so much of our functioning as a human being. And so when they developed L-Dopa, they were able to give this to these patients, and these patients who had been like basically non-functional for decades now came alive, and it was this incredible period of time where they were learning so much about the brain. And that's really, I think, the main central focus and what you can pull from this book, besides just like someone's just fascinating life as he went through and explored so many different cities and countries and was in so many different fields of study. But especially it's just the medical, just incredible, like this period of time where we were learning so much about the human mind and human brain. And Oliver Sacks met so many interesting scientists, things that we just take for granted now that are just part of science and health and the brain and whatnot. They were just finding out at this period, and Oliver Sacks was meeting these people, speaking with them. He was writing books about all these different case files. Really, really fascinating stuff. He got to see there's little pockets of areas where everyone, like a 10% of the population in this one town, where everyone was born, I think they were born deaf. I think it was, no, deaf or mute. I couldn't remember where. Basically, so a huge chunk of the town could do sign language because so many people couldn't speak over there. There was also, he did lots of studies, as I said, in people who had Tourette's. They even explored that and did little documentaries on it. So there's all these different aspects that get explored. So if you're someone who really, really loves, just obviously autobiographies, or just haven't explored it yet, but really, really like to check something that would be really fascinating, this is really, I think, the book to start with, or at least to check out just in general, because you get to really see someone exploring relationships, life, what it's like to deal with the sexuality aspect that's not in the norm at that time, and obviously still to this day is still kind of complicated for people to meander through. I wouldn't know, unfortunately. I'm straight. I'm sorry. But and also seeing his thoughts on exploring the physical body and powerlifting and training, and also getting to see all these really, really interesting aspects of science and health and the mind and the body, how they're all interconnected, and his fascinating ideas on them. So if you really, really want to have a really cool book that you can just kind of get a little, like, wet your feet with, not only autobiography but also science and health, this is a great, great book to check out. So I highly recommend it. And I would recommend checking out Musicophilia. I haven't read the other books from Oliver Sacks yet. I'm planning to, but I would definitely recommend checking out Musicophilia as well. And maybe one day I'll do a review on it, but it's so hard to read. I don't even know how I would be able to explain it. So check it out. Let me know what you think if you do check it out down below. Like, comment, subscribe. I'm obviously going to be more focused in general on fantasy books and whatnot, but every once in a while I'd like to throw a book like this inside, because I do enjoy, philosophy, psychology, science, health, nutrition, that kind of stuff. And it's cool sometimes. Breaks the flow. And yeah, thanks for checking me out. Have yourselves a wonderful day.